The rain struck like needles against her skin, but Marin Holloway kept running. Behind her, Stormhaven blazed with candlelight, warm and golden and suffocating. Her father's voice still rang in her ears, that cold ultimatum delivered in front of everyone. Marry Roderick Fane by month's end, or leave this family forever. She had chosen. Her slippers were ruined within 20 steps. Her gown, the pale blue silk her mother had commissioned for her 23rd birthday, clung to her body like a second skin. The wind howled through the estate grounds, bending the ancient oaks nearly double, and Marin did not care. She would rather drown in this storm than spend one more moment in that house, pretending she had any choice at all. The garden path turned to mud beneath her feet. She slipped, caught herself on a stone bench, and pressed forward toward the iron gate that led to the moors. If she could reach the old groundskeeper's cottage, she could shelter there until dawn. Then she would walk to the village, find passage on a mail coach, and disappear. She had no money, no connections, no plan beyond escape. It did not matter. Nothing mattered except putting distance between herself and the life her father had designed for her. Lightning split the sky, and in its flash, she saw him. Caelan Ravencourt, Duke of Stormhaven, stood at the garden gate, blocking her path. Rain streamed down his face, plastering his dark hair to his forehead, soaking through his evening coat. He looked furious. No, she thought. Not him. Anyone but him. "Get out of my way," she shouted over the wind. "Don't be absurd." His voice cut through the storm, low and commanding. "You'll die out here." "That's my concern, not yours. It became my concern when you ran out of my house in the middle of a tempest." Her father had orchestrated the entire evening, arranging for Roderick Fane to be seated beside her, for the announcement to be made in front of the Duke and his sister and half the county's aristocracy. Maximum humiliation. Maximum pressure. Her father knew exactly what he was doing. "Your house, your rules," she said bitterly. "I'm leaving both behind." To go where? He stepped closer, and she could see the hard set of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. "The moors will kill you before morning. The river has flooded. There's nowhere to go. Then I'll find somewhere." "Marin." His hand closed around her arm, firm but not painful. "Stop." The sound of her name in his voice made something crack in her chest. He never used her name. In all the time she had known him, all those years of being his sister, Vivienne's closest companion, he had called her Miss Holloway, with perfect, distant courtesy. He had looked through her at dinners, excused himself when she entered rooms, treated her like an inconvenient guest who had overstayed her welcome. And now he was standing in a storm, soaked to the bone, saying her name like it mattered. "Let go of me." "No." I said, "Let go." And I said, "No." His grip did not tighten, but he did not release her either. "Your father is a fool, and Roderick Fane is a snake, but dying of exposure will not solve either problem." She stared at him, rain streaming into her eyes. "You heard. Everyone heard. Your father made certain of that." The humiliation burned fresh, hot and sharp beneath her ribs. "Then you understand why I can't go back. I understand why you want to run." His voice softened, just fractionally. "But running into a storm with no shelter, no money, and no plan is not courage. It's suicide." What would you know about courage? The words escaped before she could stop them. "You've never had to fight for anything in your life. You were born with a title, a fortune, an estate. You've never had someone try to sell you to the highest bidder." A shadow passed through his eyes, too fast to read. "You don't know what I've had to fight. And you don't know me at all. I know you're shivering." He shrugged off his coat, heavy and soaked, but still warmer than her ruined gown, and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. I know you're too stubborn to admit when you need help, and I know that if you die on my grounds, I'll have to explain it to Vivian, and she'll never forgive me. Vivian, his sister, her dearest friend. She'll understand, Marin said, voice low. She'll be devastated. His hand was still on her arm, steadying her against the wind. And so will I. The words landed strangely, settling into a place she did not want to examine. You don't even like me. That's not true. You've barely spoken to me in all this time. That's also not true. I've spoken to you precisely as much as propriety allows. A pause. Perhaps less than I wanted. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, and the thunder that followed shook the ground beneath their feet. Kaylin's face hardened. We need to move. Now. He pulled her forward, not toward the main house, but toward the eastern wing, where a door she had never noticed stood half hidden by overgrown ivy. There's a groundskeeper's cottage at the edge of the estate, abandoned but dry. We can shelter there until the storm passes. And then what? He looked back at her, rain streaming down his face, and for a moment she saw something beneath the aristocratic mask, something raw, something almost desperate. Then we figure out how to save you from a marriage you don't want. He pushed through the door, pulling her into the darkness beyond, and Marin followed, heart pounding, into the unknown. The cottage was small, dark, and freezing. Kaylin found a lantern by touch, struck a match, and pale light flickered to life, revealing a single room with a narrow bed, a cold hearth, and dust thick enough to write in. The windows rattled with each gust of wind, and rain leaked through a crack in the roof, pooling in the corner. It was miserable. It was also the only shelter for miles. Stay here, he said, already moving toward the hearth. I'll start a fire. Marin stood by the door, dripping onto the worn floorboards, his coat hanging heavy on her shoulders. She should give it back. He was just as soaked as she was, his shirt clinging to his chest, his movements sharp with cold. But she couldn't bring herself to remove it. The weight felt like an anchor, the only thing keeping her from flying apart. You should go back, she said, to the main house. Your guests will wonder where you've gone. Let them wonder. He knelt before the hearth, arranging kindling with practiced efficiency. They can entertain themselves for one evening. And what will you tell them tomorrow? That you spent the night alone with an unmarried woman in an abandoned cottage? His hand stilled. I'll tell them whatever protects your reputation. My reputation, she laughed, hollow and bitter. My father destroyed that the moment he announced my engagement to Roderick without my consent. Everyone in that dining room saw me run. They'll draw their own conclusions. Then we'll give them different conclusions to draw. He struck another match, and this time the kindling caught, flames licking hungrily at the dry wood. The firelight cast shadows across his face, sharpening the angles, making him look older than his 28 years. Such as? You were overcome by the heat. I escorted you to take air. The storm caught us before we could return. He added a larger log, watching the flames grow. It's thin, but it's plausible. And Roderick. A muscle ticked in his cheek. Roderick Fane is a coward and a fortune hunter. His family's debts are well known, even if his charm conceals them from casual observation. Your father chose him because Fane is desperate enough to agree to any terms. The bluntness of it stole her breath. You know about the debts. I know everything about everyone who enters my home. He rose, brushing dust from his knees. It's a habit I developed young, useful for avoiding those who want something from me. And what do I want from you? The question hung between them, loaded with something neither acknowledged. Kaylin met her eyes, and for a long moment, he simply looked at her. Not through her. At her. I don't know, he murmured. That's what makes you dangerous. Before she could respond, lightning struck somewhere close, the crack of it violent and immediate, and the cottage shook. Marin flinched, and Kaelin moved without thinking, stepping between her and the window, as if his body could shield her from the sky itself. They stood frozen, inches apart, his chest nearly touching hers. "The storm's getting worse," he said, voice low. I noticed. Neither moved. "You should change out of those wet clothes." He stepped back abruptly, gesturing toward a trunk in the corner. "There may be blankets, something dry. And what will you do? Stand in the corner with your eyes closed? If necessary. How chivalrous. I'm trying to preserve what little remains of your virtue, Miss Holloway." The formality had returned, a wall reconstructing itself brick by brick. "You might show some appreciation." "My virtue is my concern, not yours. Everything that happens under my roof is my concern." He moved to the trunk, opening it with more force than necessary. "Here, blankets. Dry. Use them." He tossed 2 wool blankets onto the bed, then turned his back to her with pointed deliberation. Marin stood in the firelight, shivering, pride warring with practicality. Her gown was soaked through. She could feel the cold seeping into her bones, making her teeth chatter, despite her best efforts to stop them. "I'm not removing my clothing with you in the room. Then you'll freeze. Then I'll freeze." He turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see his profile. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever encountered. And you are the most infuriating man." Then we're well matched. The words landed strangely, echoing in the small space. Well matched. As if this was something other than a disaster. As if they were anything other than 2 people trapped by circumstance and weather. Marin grabbed a blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders over his coat, layering warmth against the cold. It was not enough, but it was something. "I'm going to sit by the fire," she announced. "You can do whatever you like." How generous. She settled onto the floor near the hearth, drawing her knees to her chest, and tried to stop shivering. The flames were building now, casting genuine heat into the room, and she stretched her frozen fingers toward the warmth. After a long moment, Kaelin sat beside her, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel the heat of him, could smell rain and something else beneath it, something woodsy and masculine. "You cannot marry Roderick Fane," he said, keeping his voice even. "I'm aware. I mean it. He'll destroy you. Not all at once, but slowly. He'll spend your dowry, isolate you from everyone you love, and when the money runs out, he'll find ways to make you miserable that don't leave visible marks." She turned to look at him. The firelight caught the hard line of his jaw, the shadow beneath his eyes. He looked exhausted, like he had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "How do you know so much about him?" "Because I've watched him do it before." His voice was flat. His first wife died within 3 years of their marriage. The official cause was a fever. The unofficial cause was despair. Marin's stomach turned. She's dead. And no one protected her. At last, he met her eyes. "I won't make that mistake again." Something shifted in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. "Why do you care what happens to me?" He looked away into the flames. "I don't know. I've been asking myself the same question for years." The storm did not break. Marin woke to gray light filtering through the grimy windows and the sound of rain still hammering against the roof. Her body ached from sleeping on the hard floor, and her gown had dried stiff and uncomfortable against her skin. Kaelin was already awake. He stood by the window, arms crossed, staring out at the flooded landscape. His shirt had dried, wrinkled, his hair disheveled in a way she had never seen before. He looked human, vulnerable almost. "How long have you been awake?" she asked, voice rough with sleep. "A few hours. You should have woken me. You needed the rest." He did not turn. "The river has overflowed its banks. The road to the village is impassable. We're not leaving today." She sat up slowly, wincing at the stiffness in her neck. "What about the main house?" "Also cut off. The eastern bridge flooded sometime before dawn. We're trapped here until the water recedes." Trapped. The word settled over her like a weight. "How long?" "A day. Perhaps 2. Now he did turn, and his expression was carefully neutral. "I've checked the provisions. There's enough firewood to last, and I found some dried goods in the cellar. We won't starve." That's comforting. It's reality. He moved away from the window, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "We'll need a story. When we return, people will ask questions. Let them ask. You say that now. But when the whispers start, when invitations stop arriving, when other women cross the street to avoid you, you'll wish we had planned more carefully." She watched him pace, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching. "You're worried." "I'm realistic." "No, you're worried." She rose, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. "About my reputation, or about your own?" He stopped pacing. "What is that supposed to mean?" "You're a duke, eligible, wealthy. If word spreads that you spent 2 days alone with Bartholomew Holloway's scandalous daughter, mothers across England will recalculate their strategies. Some will see opportunity. Others will see competition eliminated. You think I care about that? I think you've spent years avoiding any hint of attachment or obligation. I think you've built walls so high that even your own sister can barely reach you. And I think being trapped here with me threatens whatever careful distance you've maintained." His gaze darkened. "You presume to know a great deal about my walls. I've had a long time to study them." The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken things. Outside, thunder rumbled, distant, but insistent. "Why did you never speak to me?" Marin asked after a long pause. "All those dinners, all those house parties. Vivienne would invite me for weeks at a time, and you would barely acknowledge my presence. I thought you despised me." "I didn't despise you." "Then what?" He looked away, his expression strained. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." "Why?" "Because I'm trapped in a cottage with you for the next 2 days, and if we're going to survive without killing each other, I'd like to understand why you've treated me like a particularly unpleasant obligation since the moment we met." Emotion crossed his face. Pain, perhaps, or something older, deeper. "Because you were never an obligation," he said, voice soft. "That was the problem." She stared at him. "I don't understand." "You were Vivienne's friend. Young, bright, full of opinions about everything from literature to land management. You argued with me about crop rotation at breakfast and made me laugh despite myself at dinner." He ran a hand through his hair. "You were exactly the kind of woman I couldn't afford to notice." "Couldn't afford?" "I have duties, Miss Holloway. Expectations. My father made arrangements before his death, understandings with certain families about advantageous matches. I've spent the last 6 years trying to honor those expectations while building something of my own. And then you appeared in my dining room, debating the merits of tenant farming with my steward, and everything became considerably more complicated." Marin's heart was beating too fast. "So you ignored me. I kept my distance. For all this time. For all this time." He met her eyes, and she saw something raw there, something unguarded. "Do you have any idea how difficult that was?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. She should not pursue this, should not push further into territory that could only lead to disaster. They were already compromised simply by being here. Adding emotional entanglement would make everything worse. But she could not stop herself. "Then why follow me into the storm?" He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was strained. "Because watching you run into that tempest was the most terrifying moment of my life. because I realized that if something happened to you, if you disappeared, or froze, or drowned, I would never forgive myself for every moment I wasted pretending not to see you. She could not breathe. You see me. I have always seen you. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. That was never the question. Then what was? Whether I had the right to look. Rain drummed against the windows. The fire crackled in the hearth. They stood inches apart, and Maren could feel the heat of him, could see the rapid pulse at his throat. Your father will come looking for you, Kaelin said, barely above a whisper. Once the storm passes, once the road's clear, he won't let you escape that easily. I know. Roderick will be with him. They'll demand you return. Demand you honor the agreement. There was no agreement. I never consented. That won't matter to them. She lifted her chin. Then we'll have to make sure they don't find me. We? He raised an eyebrow. You followed me into the storm. You brought me here. You said you wouldn't make the same mistake as before. She held his gaze. Were those just words? Or did you mean them? The challenge landed between them like a gauntlet thrown. I meant them, he said slowly. Then help me. Help me disappear before my father can drag me back. Help me find somewhere to go. Someone who will take me in. I have a cousin in Scotland who might receive me, or friends in London who owe me favors. I just need time to plan, to think, to find a way forward that doesn't end with me shackled to Roderick Fane for the rest of my life. He studied her face, and she did not know what he was searching for, what answer he hoped to find. There might be another way, he said at last. What way? His mouth compressed. One I'm not ready to name. Not yet. Before she could press further, a sound reached them over the rain, distant, but unmistakable. Voices. Coming closer, Kaelin moved to the window, his features sharpening. Someone's found us. Maren's blood went cold. My father? I don't know. He turned to her, eyes sharp. But whatever happens next, stay behind me. Do you understand? She nodded, heart pounding, as footsteps approached the cottage door. The door burst open before Kaelin could reach it. Roderick Fane stood in the doorway, rain streaming down his handsome face, flanked by two men Maren recognized as her father's servants. His golden hair was plastered to his forehead, his traveling coat soaked through, but his smile was perfectly composed. There you are, he said, as if he had simply misplaced her at a garden party. We've been searching all night. Kaelin positioned himself between Maren and the door. You're trespassing on my land, Fane. Trespassing? I'm rescuing my betrothed from a compromising situation. Roderick's eyes moved past Kaelin to Maren, and something cold slithered beneath his pleasant expression. Your father is beside himself with worry, my dear. When you ran off into that storm, we feared the worst. I'm not your betrothed, Maren said, keeping her voice steady. I never agreed to any engagement. A minor formality. Your father has given his consent, which is all that matters under law. Roderick stepped forward, and Kaelin moved to block him. Come now, Ravencourt. Surely you don't intend to keep another man's fiancée hostage in a groundskeeper's cottage. She came here of her own will. She stays of her own will. Does she? Roderick's smile sharpened. Or has she simply traded one cage for another? I wonder what society will say when they learn the Duke of Stormhaven spent the night alone with Miss Holloway. Unchaperoned. In such intimate quarters. The threat was clear. Maren felt it land like a blow to the chest. Say what you like, Kaelin replied, voice even. No one will believe you. Won't they? Roderick gestured at the small room, the single bed, their disheveled clothing. The evidence speaks for itself. A ruined woman and the man who ruined her. Unless, of course, You intend to make an honest woman of her yourself." Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Marin watched Kaelin's shoulders tighten, watched the tension in his frame. He was calculating, she realized, weighing options, measuring costs. "That's what I thought," Roderick said softly. "You don't want her. You just don't want anyone else to have her. How very selfish of you, Your Grace. You know nothing about what I want. I know you've spent years ignoring her existence. I know you're courting no one, committing to no one, while the rest of us scramble for whatever scraps of feminine attention remain." Roderick's voice turned silky. "I know that Marin Holloway is worth more than your indifference, and I intend to give her everything you've withheld." "Everything except choice," Marin said sharply. "Everything except consent. Everything except the basic dignity of being asked rather than told." Roderick's smile flickered. "You're overwrought, my dear. The storm, the cold, this unfortunate situation. Once you've rested, once you've had time to consider your options rationally, you'll see that I'm offering you security, protection, a future. A future as your possession. A future as my wife." He extended his hand toward her, palm up as if offering a gift. "Come with me now, Marin. Your father is waiting at the main house. We can announce our engagement properly, and this entire unpleasantness can be forgotten." She did not move. "If you refuse," Roderick continued, voice hardening, "I'll be forced to inform society of what I found here this morning. The Duke of Stormhaven and Miss Holloway, alone, in a bed." His eyes glittered. "Her reputation will be destroyed. No one else will have her. And eventually, inevitably, she'll come crawling back to me anyway." Kaelin moved so fast Marin barely saw it. One moment he was standing between them. The next, he had Roderick by the collar, slamming him against the doorframe with enough force to rattle the walls. "Threaten her again," Kaelin said, voice deadly low, "and I will end you." Roderick's composure cracked. Fear flashed across his face before he could hide it. "You wouldn't dare. My family has connections. My father knows people who could destroy your reputation, your investments, your entire legacy. Your family is bankrupt." Kaelin leaned closer, and his voice dropped to something almost intimate in its menace. "I know exactly how much your father owes, and to whom. I know about the gambling debts, the failed speculation, the creditors circling like vultures. You need Miss Holloway's dowry to survive. Without it, you'll be destitute within the year." Roderick's face drained of color. "So here is what will happen," Kaelin continued. "You will leave my property. You will tell Bartholomew Holloway that his daughter is under my protection, and will remain so until she chooses otherwise. And you will never speak to her, approach her, or threaten her again. Do you understand?" Roderick's expression twisted. "This isn't over." "It is." Kaelin released him, stepping back. "Get out." For a long moment, Roderick did not move. His eyes found Marin over Kaelin's shoulder, and she saw something there that made her blood run cold. Not defeat. Calculation. "Your Grace," he said, smoothing his collar with trembling hands. "Miss Holloway." He turned and walked back into the rain, the servants following. The door swung shut behind them. Marin released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her knees felt weak, her hands trembling. "He'll tell my father everything." "Yes. He'll tell everyone." "Probably." She stared at Kaelin's back, at the rigid line of his shoulders, the tension radiating from every muscle. "You just destroyed my reputation to save me from him." Slowly, he turned. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "I destroyed your reputation the moment I followed you into that storm. Everything since then has been damage control." "Then why do it? Why protect me? Why threaten him?" He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. "Because the alternative was watching him take you. and I discovered I would rather burn down everything I've built than allow that to happen." The silence after his words was deafening. Maren stood frozen, blanket clutched around her shoulders, staring at him as if he had spoken in a language she did not understand. Kaelin turned away, moving to the window, watching Roderick's retreating figure disappear into the storm. "You shouldn't have done that," she said at last. "Probably not. He'll retaliate. His family may be bankrupt, but they still have influence, friends in Parliament, connections to newspapers that thrive on scandal. I'm aware. Then why?" Her voice cracked. "Why risk everything for someone you've spent years pretending doesn't exist?" He did not answer immediately. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and the rain intensified, drumming against the roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. "Do you remember the Thornbridge ball?" he asked, voice low. 3 years ago. You wore a green gown with gold embroidery." The abrupt shift confused her. "I remember. You argued with Lord Pembroke about tenant rights for nearly an hour. He was patronizing, dismissive, kept trying to redirect you to safer topics, like needlework and weather." Kaelin's voice was distant, remembering. "You didn't back down. You cited agricultural reports, quoted economists, referenced successful reforms on other estates. By the end, he was actually listening. I also spilled wine on his waistcoat. That was the best part." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I watched you from across the room, and I thought, there is a woman who will never let anyone diminish her. A woman who fights for what she believes, even when the world tells her to be silent." Maren's throat tightened. "You were watching?" "I was always watching." He turned to face her, and the mask was gone, leaving something raw and exposed. Every dinner, every house party, every conversation you had with Vivian that I pretended not to hear. I watched you bloom into someone extraordinary, and I told myself it didn't matter, that you were too young, too connected to my family, too dangerous to everything I'd planned. And now? Now, I've destroyed years of careful distance in a single night, and I find I don't regret it. She should not move toward him, should not close the space between them, but her feet carried her forward anyway, until she stood close enough to see the pulse jumping in his throat. "What changed?" "Your father announced your engagement to a man who would crush everything bright and fierce about you." His voice roughened. "And I realized that all my careful plans meant nothing if they ended with you belonging to someone else. I don't belong to anyone. I know." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear. "That's what I've always loved about you." The word hung between them. Loved. Not like. Not admire. Loved. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "I've never meant anything more. You've known me all these years and spoken to me perhaps a dozen times. I've known you all these years and thought about you every single day." His hand dropped to his side, but he did not step back. "I know you prefer coffee to tea, though you'll drink tea to be polite. I know you read philosophy texts when you think no one is looking. I know you cry at sad endings, but pretend the dust bothered your eyes. I know you laugh loudest at your own jokes, and always save the best pieces of dessert for Vivian, even when you want them yourself." Tears burned behind her eyes. "You noticed all that?" "I noticed everything. I just couldn't let myself act on it." "Why not?" "Because I was afraid." The admission seemed to cost him something. Afraid that if I let myself feel what I felt, I would lose control of everything else. My responsibilities. My duties. The careful architecture of a life built on obligation rather than desire. "And now?" he laughed, low and bitter. "Now I've thrown a man against a wall, threatened to ruin his family, and declared myself protector of a woman I have no right to protect. So much for control." Maren reached up, her fingers brushing his jaw before she could stop herself. He went very still. "What if I don't want your protection?" she asked, voice soft. "What if I want something else?" His eyes darkened. "What do you want?" "I don't know yet." She let her hand fall. "But I know it's not someone who treats me like an obligation. Not someone who ignores me for years, then suddenly decides I'm worth saving." The words landed like a slap. Kaelin flinched. "You're right," he said, the words coming out raw. "I've been a coward. I told myself I was being honorable, maintaining proper distance, protecting you from the complications of my attention. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. From rejection. From wanting something I thought I couldn't have. And what do you think you can have now?" "Nothing." The word was quiet, final. "I've made a mess of everything. Your reputation is in tatters. Your father will never consent to anything involving me. And Roderick will spend the rest of his life trying to destroy us both. Then we're ruined already." "Yes. So what do we have to lose?" He stared at her, and she watched the war play out across his face. Duty against desire. Fear against hope. The careful walls he had built against the chaos threatening to overwhelm them. "Everything," he said at last. "We have everything to lose. Then let's lose it together." She kissed him. It was reckless, impulsive, exactly the kind of thing she would have done before her father tried to sell her to a monster. Her lips pressed against his, soft and uncertain, and for a terrible moment, he did not respond. Then his hands came up, cupping her face, and he kissed her back like he was drowning, and she was air. The kiss was nothing like she had imagined. It was desperate and tender and fierce all at once. His fingers tangled in her hair, her hands fisted in his shirt, and the world outside the cottage ceased to exist. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "That was a mistake," he said, voice low. "Probably. We should stop." "Probably." Neither moved away. "Your father will come for you," Kaelin said, "once the storm clears. He won't let this go." "I know. I can't fight him alone. My influence has limits, and Bartholomew Holloway has spent 20 years building alliances specifically designed to crush anyone who crosses him." "Then we'll find other alliances." She held his gaze. "Together." Something shifted in his eyes, something that looked almost like hope. "You really want to do this? Risk everything on a man who spent years too afraid to speak to you?" "I want to choose my own fate." She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "And right now, I'm choosing you." The fire had burned low by the time they finished talking. Maren sat on the floor, her back against the bed frame, Kaelin beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. The storm had gentled to a steady rain, and weak afternoon light filtered through the windows. "Tell me about your father," she said, voice soft. "The arrangements you mentioned, the expectations." He was silent for a long moment, staring into the dying flames. When he spoke, his voice was flat, reciting facts rather than feeling them. "My father was a practical man. He believed that love was a luxury the aristocracy could not afford, that duty to family, to legacy, to the preservation of wealth and power, superseded any personal desires." Kaelin's features hardened. "He arranged my mother's marriage when she was 17. She was beautiful, accomplished, from an excellent family. She was also desperately in love with someone else." Maren's chest ached. "What happened?" "She did her duty. Married my father. Produced an heir and a spare." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Vivienne and me. And then she spent the next 20 years slowly fading away, like a flower pressed between the pages of a book. She died when I was 19. The official cause was a weak heart. The unofficial cause was a life lived entirely for others." "Kaelin." She reached for his hand, and he let her take it. "I'm sorry. Before she died, she made me promise something." His fingers tightened around hers. "She made me promise that I would never do to someone else what had been done to her. That I would never force a woman into a marriage she didn't want. Never use duty as an excuse to crush someone's spirit." "And your father's arrangements?" "He made them before he died. Understandings with 3 families, any of whom would be acceptable matches. I've spent 6 years finding reasons to delay, to deflect, to avoid choosing any of them." He looked at her, and his eyes were haunted. "Because every time I considered it, I remembered my mother's face. The way she used to stare out windows for hours, seeing something none of us could see. The way she flinched when my father entered a room." Tears slipped down Marin's cheeks. She did not bother to wipe them away. "That's why you never courted anyone," she said slowly. "That's why you kept your distance from everyone, not just me. I told myself I was being responsible, waiting until I found someone I could genuinely care for, someone who could genuinely care for me. But the truth is, I was terrified." He laughed, hollow. "Terrified of becoming my father. Terrified of destroying someone the way he destroyed her." "You're not your father." "How do you know?" "Because your father would never have followed a woman into a storm, would never have thrown a man against a wall to protect her, would never have spent years watching from a distance because he was afraid of hurting her." She turned to face him fully, cupping his face in her hands. "You are not him, Kaylin. You never have been." Something cracked in his expression. The walls he had built, the careful control he maintained, all of it crumbled in a single moment. "I love you," he said, and the words sounded torn from somewhere deep. "I have loved you since the Thornbridge Ball, since before that, since the first moment you walked into my dining room and told my steward he was wrong about crop rotation. I have loved you so long I don't remember what it felt like not to love you." She kissed him again, tasting salt, not knowing if the tears were hers or his. "Then marry me," she whispered against his lips. He pulled back, shock flashing across his face. "What?" "Marry me. Not because my father demands it. Not because Roderick threatens us. Not because society expects it." She held his gaze. "Marry me because we choose each other. Because we're both terrified, and we're doing it anyway. Because I would rather face ruin with you than safety with anyone else." "Marin." His voice broke on her name. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking. Your father will never consent. He'll fight this with everything he has. Then we'll fight back. Society will shun you. The scandal of a broken engagement, a night spent alone with another man, a hasty marriage to cover it up. Let them shun me. I have enemies, people who would love to see me fall. They'll use you to hurt me, use our marriage as proof of my recklessness, my unsuitability. Then we'll face them together." He stared at her, and she watched the war in his eyes end, watched surrender wash over his features like dawn breaking. "You're certain," he murmured. "Absolutely certain." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Your family, your friends, everything you've known, is not worth having if it comes at the cost of my freedom." She took his hands in hers. "My father made me a prisoner in my own life, Kaylin. He decided who I would marry, where I would live, what I would be. He never once asked what I wanted. And when I chose for myself, when I ran into that storm, you followed me." Her voice strengthened. "You saw me. Not as property, not as an obligation. As a person. That's worth more than all the respectability in England." He pulled her close, crushing her against his chest, his face buried in her hair. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "Probably not." He laughed, rough and broken. When did you become so brave? When I realized I had nothing left to lose, she pulled back to look at him. Will you do it? Will you marry me? Yes. The word came out fierce, absolute. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. She kissed him again, and this time there was no hesitation, no fear. Only the overwhelming certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. When they pulled apart, the rain had stopped. Kaelin moved to the window, looking out at the sodden landscape. The clouds are breaking. The water will start receding within hours. How long until they can reach us? By tomorrow morning, certainly. Perhaps sooner if the eastern bridge holds. He turned back to her, and his expression had shifted, becoming calculating, focused. We need to move quickly. If we're going to do this, we need to do it before your father can interfere. What are you thinking? There's a village about 3 miles north, small, remote, with a vicar who owes me several favors. A smile tugged at his lips. How do you feel about getting married tonight? Tonight? She blinked. Is that even possible? With a special license, yes. I keep one in my study, signed and ready. I've had it for 2 years, just in case. She stared at him. You've had a marriage license for 2 years? I told you. I've loved you a long time. He crossed to her, taking her hands. It's irregular, scandalous, even. But if we're married before your father arrives, there's nothing he can do. You'll be my wife, under my protection, beyond his reach. And Roderick? We'll have to find another fortune to plunder. His grip tightened. Say yes, Marin. Say yes, and I'll spend the rest of my life making certain you never regret it. She looked at him, this man who had watched her for years and found the courage to act. This man who had followed her into a storm. This man who was offering her everything she had never dared to want. Yes, she said. Let's get married tonight. The floodwaters receded enough by late afternoon for Kaelin to make the treacherous ride back to Stormhaven's main house. He returned within 2 hours, the license tucked safely inside his coat, along with dry clothes for them both. The journey to the village took longer than expected after that. The roads were thick with mud, and twice they had to stop while Kaelin cleared fallen branches from their path. By the time the small stone church came into view, the sun had set, and stars were beginning to appear through the breaking clouds. Marin's heart pounded as Kaelin helped her down from the horse. Her borrowed gown was simple, but clean, her hair pinned up hastily. She looked nothing like a bride. She had never felt more certain of anything in her life. Wait here, Kaelin said, squeezing her hand. I need to speak with the vicar. She watched him disappear through the church's heavy wooden door, then turned to look at the village around her. It was tiny, perhaps 20 cottages clustered around a single lane, with the church at one end and a small inn at the other. Candlelight glowed in windows, and somewhere a dog barked. This was where she would be married. Not in the grand cathedral her mother had always imagined, not surrounded by hundreds of guests in their finest silks. In a village so small it probably did not appear on most maps, wearing a borrowed gown, with hope burning in her heart. It was perfect. The church door opened, and Kaelin emerged with an elderly man in clerical robes. The vicar's face was lined with age, but kind, and he looked at Marin with something like understanding. So this is the young lady, he said, voice warm. His Grace has told me your situation. Most irregular, but not unprecedented. He smiled. Love rarely follows the rules we set for it. You'll marry us? Marin asked. I'll marry you. He gestured toward the church. Come inside. My wife will serve as witness, and the sexton can provide the second signature. We'll have you wed before the hour is out. The interior of the church was simple, but beautiful. Candles flickered on the altar, casting warm light across worn wooden pews. A woman Marin assumed was the vicar's wife stood near the front, smiling encouragingly. Kaelin took her hand as they walked down the aisle, and she felt his fingers trembling slightly against hers. The great Duke of Stormhaven, terrified of a village wedding. Something in her chest expanded with fierce tenderness. "I don't have a ring," he murmured. "I didn't think to bring one. I don't need a ring. You deserve one. You deserve flowers and music and a gown that cost more than this entire village. I have you." She squeezed his hand. "That's enough." The ceremony was brief, the words ancient and familiar. Maren spoke her vows with a clear voice, watching Kaelin's face as he repeated them back to her. His eyes never left hers, and she saw something there she had never seen before. Peace. As if a weight he had carried for years had been lifted. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the vicar said, and the words rang through the small church like bells. Kaelin kissed her, gentle and reverent, his hands cupping her face as if she were something precious. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. "My wife," he said, voice low. "I never thought I would say those words and mean them." "Your wife," she agreed, "for better or worse. Mostly worse, I suspect, given current circumstances." She laughed, and the sound echoed off the stone walls. "Probably. But I've never been interested in easy." The vicar signed the register, followed by his wife and the sexton. Kaelin added his signature with a flourish, then handed the pen to Maren. She hesitated for just a moment, looking at the blank line where her name would go. Maren Holloway, she had been. Maren Holloway, daughter of Bartholomew, property to be traded. But that woman had walked into a storm and never looked back. She signed her new name with steady hands. Maren Ravencourt, Duchess of Stormhaven. "There's a room at the inn," the vicar said to Kaelin, voice low. "My wife sent word ahead. It's not much, but it's private. Thank you." Kaelin pressed coins into the man's hand. "For everything." "Thank me by being happy." The vicar smiled at them both. "The world has too little happiness in it. Don't waste what you've found." The inn was indeed small, but the room the innkeeper showed them to was clean and warm, with a fire already burning in the hearth and fresh linens on the bed. A bottle of wine and 2 glasses sat on a small table, along with bread, cheese, and cold meat. "The vicar's wife's doing," Kaelin said, noticing her surprise. "She must have arranged it when she sent word ahead. She's very thorough. She's been waiting for me to stop being foolish for years. I suspect she's relieved." He closed the door, and suddenly they were alone. Truly alone, for the first time since the cottage. The weight of what they had done settled over Maren like a cloak. She was married, to a duke, a man she had loved from a distance for years, who had loved her back without ever saying a word. Having second thoughts, Kaelin asked, voice soft. "No." She turned to face him. "Are you?" "Not even one." He crossed to her, stopping just close enough to touch. "But I want you to know that we don't have to do anything you're not ready for. Tonight, or any night. The marriage is legal. The paperwork is signed. Everything else can wait. And if I don't want to wait," his breath caught, "then I am entirely at your disposal." She kissed him first, rising on her toes to press her lips against his. He responded instantly, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her close until there was no space between them. The kiss deepened, became something hungrier, more desperate. His hands found the laces at the back of her gown, and she felt them loosen, felt the fabric slip from her shoulders. She fumbled with his cravat, his waistcoat, pushing fabric aside until she could feel the warmth of his skin beneath her palms. They moved toward the bed in a tangle of limbs and half-removed clothing, laughing when they stumbled, gasping when skin met skin. Kaelin laid her down on the fresh linens like she was something sacred, his eyes tracing every inch of her with reverent hunger. "I've imagined this," he confessed, voice low. More times than I should admit. So have I. You have? Don't look so surprised. She pulled him down to her. I told you. I've loved you for years. They came together slowly, carefully, learning each other's rhythms. There was pain, but it faded quickly, replaced by something sweeter, something building. Maren wrapped herself around him, and he whispered her name against her throat like a prayer. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. The fire had burned low, casting the room in soft amber light. Regrets? He asked, voice soft. None. She pressed a kiss to his chest. You. Only that I wasted years being afraid. His arms tightened around her. We could have had this so much sooner. We have it now. That's what matters. He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was serious. Your father will come for you tomorrow. He won't accept this. I know. It will be ugly. He'll threaten us both. Try to have the marriage annulled. Claim you were coerced or mentally unfit. I know. Are you ready for that fight? She lifted her head to look at him. Her husband, this man who had followed her into a storm and married her in a village church and loved her with his whole terrified heart. I'm ready for anything, she said, as long as you're beside me. He kissed her forehead, soft and sweet. Always. They slept wrapped around each other, and for one perfect night, the world outside ceased to exist. Maren woke to shouting. She sat up in the unfamiliar bed, disoriented, the events of the previous night flooding back in a rush. The inn, the marriage, Kalen. He was already on his feet, pulling on his shirt, his face grim. What's happening? She asked. Your father. His voice was flat. He's found us. Her stomach dropped. She scrambled out of bed, grabbing for her gown, trying to make herself presentable even as the shouting grew louder. She could hear her father's voice now, demanding entry, threatening the innkeeper with legal action if he was not immediately shown to his daughter. The marriage certificate, she said. Where is it? In my coat pocket. Kalen crossed to her, his hand settling on her shoulders. Listen to me. Whatever he says, whatever he threatens, remember that you're my wife now. Legally, irrevocably. He cannot take you from me. But he'll try. He'll fail. The door burst open before she could respond. Bartholomew Holloway filled the doorway, his face purple with rage. Behind him, Maren could see Roderick Fane and two constables, their expressions uncomfortable. There she is, her father snarled. My daughter, the whore. Kalen moved between them, his body shielding Maren from her father's fury. You're trespassing, Holloway. Leave now. Trespassing? This is my daughter you've corrupted, my property you've stolen. Bartholomew's eyes found Maren over Kalen's shoulder. Did he force you? Is that it? Speak the word, and these constables will arrest him for abduction. He didn't force me, Maren said, keeping her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. I chose to leave. I chose to marry him. Everything that happened was my decision. Your decision? Her father laughed, ugly and bitter. You're a woman. You don't make decisions. You follow the path your family sets for you, as your mother did, as her mother did before her. That path led to Roderick Fane. Maren stepped around Kalen, facing her father directly. A man who would have spent my dowry within a year and left me destitute. Did you know about his debts? Father, did you know his first wife died of despair? A flicker of guilt crossed Bartholomew's face. Or calculation. Lies, he said flatly, spread by your seducer to justify his actions. Roderick Fane is a gentleman from a respectable family. He would have given you security, status, children. He would have given me a cage. And this is better? Her father gestured at the small room, The rumpled bed, her disheveled appearance. Ruined, disgraced, married to a man who had to drag you to a village church in the middle of the night because no respectable vicar would sanction such a union? The vicar was perfectly respectable, Kaelin said coldly. And the marriage is legal. I have the certificate here, signed by witnesses, recorded in the parish register. Your daughter is my wife, Holloway. There is nothing you can do to change that. Bartholomew's face twisted. We'll see about that. I'll have the marriage annulled. I'll claim she was coerced, that she wasn't in her right mind. No court will uphold a union conducted under such scandalous circumstances. Any court will uphold a union entered into freely by two consenting adults. Kaelin's voice hardened. And if you pursue this, I will make certain that every dirty secret your family has ever hidden comes to light. The gambling debts, the fraudulent investments, the servants you've dismissed without references because they saw things they shouldn't have. Bartholomew went pale. You think I don't know? Kaelin continued. You think I haven't spent years watching you, understanding exactly what kind of man you are? I know everything, Holloway, and I will use every piece of it if you force my hand. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Roderick stepped forward, his handsome face twisted with spite. You're bluffing. You have nothing. Try me. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Bartholomew straightened, his expression shifting to something cold and calculated. Very well, he said, voice low. Keep her. But know this, Ravencourt. You've made an enemy today. I will spend the rest of my life ensuring that your name is synonymous with scandal. Every ball, every dinner party, every social event will be tainted by whispers of what you did. How you stole a man's daughter in the night. How you corrupted an innocent girl barely out of the schoolroom. I'm 23, Marin said sharply, hardly a child. You're dead to me. Her father's eyes found hers, and she saw nothing there. No love, no regret, only cold, empty rage. You and any children you might have. I will never acknowledge this marriage. I will never speak your name again. The words should have hurt. Part of her had hoped, foolishly, that her father might eventually accept her choice. That time might soften his anger. But looking at him now, she realized the truth. He had never loved her. She had only ever been an asset to be leveraged, a piece on a board he was playing. Her happiness had never entered his calculations. Then we have nothing more to discuss, she said, and her voice did not shake. Leave. Bartholomew stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out without another word. Roderick lingered, his eyes moving between her and Kaelin with something like hatred. This isn't over, he said, voice low. Yes, it is. Kaelin stepped forward, and Roderick flinched back. Get out of my sight, Fane, and pray we never cross paths again. Roderick left, the constables trailing awkwardly behind him. The door closed, and Marin's legs gave out. Kaelin caught her before she hit the floor, guiding her to the bed, his arms strong and steady around her. She was shaking, she realized, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. It's over, he murmured against her hair. They're gone. He disowned me. I know. My own father just looked at me like I was nothing and disowned me. I know. His arms tightened. I'm sorry. She buried her face in his chest, and for a long moment she simply breathed. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, a constant rhythm in a world that had just tilted on its axis. I thought I was prepared, she said at last. I thought I knew what it would cost. You couldn't have known. Not really. He pulled back slightly, cupping her face in his hands. But you're not alone, Marin. You have me. You have Vivian. You have a new family, one that will never treat you as property to be traded. Promise? I promise. He kissed her forehead. I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that you made the right choice. She wanted to believe him. She did believe him. But the wound her father had inflicted was raw and bleeding, and she knew it would take more than words to heal it. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We go home." He smoothed her hair back from her face. "To Stormhaven. And we start building the life we choose." The ride back to Stormhaven was quiet. Marin sat before Kaelin on the horse, his arms around her, his chest solid against her back. She should have felt safe. She did feel safe, in a physical sense. But the echoes of her father's words lingered, poisoning everything. "Dead to me. I will never speak your name again." She had known he was capable of cruelty. She had not known he was capable of that. The estate appeared through the trees, just as the afternoon sun began to fade. Stormhaven was beautiful, all gray stone and climbing ivy, with towers that reached toward the sky like fingers. Marin had visited 100 times as Vivienne's guest, but she had never looked at it as home. She supposed she would have to learn. The front doors opened as they approached, and Vivienne came running down the steps, her dark hair flying loose behind her. "Marin!" She pulled Marin into a fierce embrace the moment Kaelin helped her dismount. "Thank God. We heard the most terrible rumors. That you'd been abducted, that my brother had thrown Roderick against a wall, that you'd been married in some village church in the middle of the night. All true, except the abduction." Marin hugged her back just as fiercely. "I went willingly. I know you did." Vivienne pulled back, her eyes bright with tears, and something else. Joy. "I've been waiting years for my idiot brother to stop being an idiot. I was starting to think it would never happen." "I resent that," Kaelin said mildly. "You should. You've been an absolute fool." Vivienne linked her arm through Marin's, guiding her toward the house. "Now come inside. You look exhausted. Your gown is wrinkled, and I need to hear every detail of this elopement immediately." The interior of Stormhaven was warm and welcoming, fires burning in every hearth. Servants bustled about, shooting curious glances at Marin but saying nothing. Vivienne led her to the private sitting room, where they had spent so many hours together as friends, and now Marin would occupy as lady of the house. The thought was dizzying. "Tea first," Vivienne declared, ringing for a servant. "Then details, then a bath, a proper meal, and sleep. In that order." "There may not be time for all that," Kaelin said from the doorway. His expression had gone serious again. "A letter arrived while we were gone. From London." Vivienne's face fell. "Already?" "News travels fast when it's scandalous." He crossed to Marin, holding out the letter. "I thought you should see it first." Marin took it with trembling hands. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the seal was unmistakable. "Parliament." She broke the seal and read quickly, her blood running colder with every line. "What does it say?" Vivienne asked. "It's from Lord Ashford, chairman of the House of Lords." Marin looked up, meeting Kaelin's eyes. "He's calling for an inquiry into our marriage. Claims there are questions about the legality of the ceremony, the validity of the license, the mental fitness of the bride." "That's absurd," Vivienne said hotly. "You're perfectly fit." "Ashford is one of your father's closest allies," Kaelin said, voice low. "He owes Bartholomew several favors. This is retaliation." "Can he actually have the marriage invalidated?" "In theory, no. The ceremony was legal, the license valid, and the witnesses credible." Kaelin's expression tightened. "But an inquiry could drag on for months, years even. Our finances could be frozen, our reputation shredded. By the time it's resolved, even if we win, we could be ruined." Marin stared at the letter, feeling the weight of it pressing down on her chest. She had known there would be consequences. She had not expected them to come so fast, so hard. "There's more," she said, scanning the final paragraph. "Roderick Fane has filed a claim for breach of promise. He's demanding compensation for the engagement my father arranged without my consent." "He can't do that," Vivienne said. "You never agreed to the engagement." He has letters, documents. Marin's voice was hollow. My father must have forged them, or found some correspondence I don't remember and twisted its meaning. Either way, Roderick claims we had an understanding, and I broke it. This is coordinated, Kaelin said grimly. Your father, Roderick, Ashford. They're working together to destroy us. Then we fight back. Marin lifted her chin. We find lawyers of our own. We gather evidence. We show the world what kind of man Roderick Fane really is, what kind of father Bartholomew Holloway has been. That will take time, money, resources. You have all of those. I do. He moved closer, taking her hands. But I want you to understand what we're facing. This won't be a single battle. It will be a war. Months of legal maneuvering, social ostracism, whispers and slander, and attacks from every direction. Are you trying to scare me? I'm trying to prepare you. She looked at him, this man who had followed her into a storm and married her and stood between her and her father's rage. This man who was willing to fight the entire world for her. I'm already prepared, she said. I was prepared the moment I walked out of that dining room. Something shifted in his expression. Pride, perhaps, or love. Then we fight, he said simply. Together. Always together. Vivienne cleared her throat. If you two are finished being disgustingly romantic, I'd like to point out that I have extensive connections in London society, including several ladies who would love nothing more than to take down Lord Ashford and his pompous allies. If we're going to war, we should probably start gathering troops. Marin laughed, the sound surprising her. Here she was, disowned, threatened, facing legal destruction, and she was laughing. But she was not alone. She had Kaelin. She had Vivienne. She had a new family who would fight for her the way her old family never had. It was not much, but it was enough. Then let's gather troops, she said, and show them what happens when they try to cage a storm. The next 3 weeks were a blur of activity. Lawyers arrived from London, stern-faced men who spread documents across Kaelin's study and spoke in careful, measured tones about precedent and procedure. Letters flew back and forth, accusations and counter-accusations, threats and counter-threats. The inquiry date was set, then postponed, then set again. Through it all, Marin found strength she did not know she possessed. She reviewed every document her father's lawyers produced, identifying inconsistencies and forgeries. She wrote letters to women across the country, former acquaintances of Roderick's first wife, gathering testimony about his cruelty. She stood beside Kaelin at every meeting, every negotiation, refusing to be sidelined or protected. You're remarkable, Kaelin told her one evening, watching her work. You know that. I'm furious, she corrected. It's amazing what fury can accomplish. But the toll was visible. Dark circles appeared beneath her eyes. She ate less than she should, slept poorly when she slept at all. The weight of the battle pressed down on her, and some days it was all she could do to keep moving forward. On the morning of the inquiry, she woke before dawn. The hearing would be held at Parliament, before a panel of lords who would decide the validity of her marriage, her future, her happiness, her entire life, reduced to a legal question to be argued by men in wigs. Kaelin was already awake, watching her from his side of the bed. You don't have to come, he said, voice soft. You could wait here. Vivienne could stay with you. I'm coming. Marin, they're going to say terrible things about your character, your virtue, your sanity. I've seen these inquiries before. They're designed to humiliate, to break, to punish. Then let them try. She sat up, meeting his eyes. I will not hide while other people decide my fate. I spent 23 years letting my father make decisions for me. That ends now. He reached for her hand, pressing it to his lips. "Have I told you recently that I love you?" "Not in the last few hours." A grievous oversight. He pulled her close. "I love you, Marin Ravencourt. Whatever happens today, that will never change." The carriage ride to London was long and tense. Vivian sat across from them, her face set in determined lines. She had insisted on coming, bringing 3 of her most influential friends as witnesses to the proceedings. "Ashford expects us to be cowed," she said, as Parliament came into view. "He expects Marin to weep and plead and beg for mercy. He's going to be very disappointed." "Let's hope so," Kaelin murmured. The chamber where the inquiry was held was vast and intimidating, filled with men in formal attire who watched their entrance with varying degrees of curiosity and disdain. Lord Ashford sat at the center of the panel, his expression smug. Roderick Fane was there as well, seated with his lawyers, looking handsome and wounded and utterly false. And at the back of the room, Marin saw her father. Bartholomew Holloway met her eyes across the crowded chamber, and she saw nothing but cold satisfaction. He expected to win, expected to watch her marriage be dissolved, her reputation destroyed, her entire life reduced to rubble. He was wrong. The inquiry proceeded with painful slowness. Lawyers argued about documents, about witnesses, about the precise wording of marriage licenses, and the legal authority of village vicars. Roderick's claims were presented with theatrical sincerity, painting Marin as a confused young woman who had been seduced and manipulated by a predatory duke. Through it all, Marin sat in silence, watching, waiting. At last, Lord Ashford turned to her. "Miss Holloway, do you wish to speak on your own behalf?" "It's Mrs. Ravencourt," she said, rising. "Duchess of Stormhaven. And yes, I wish to speak." The chamber went quiet. "I have listened for 3 hours to men debate my sanity, my virtue, my capacity for independent thought." Her voice rang clear and steady. "I have heard myself called seduced, manipulated, and mentally unfit. I have heard my husband accused of predation and my marriage dismissed as invalid." She looked at her father, at Roderick, at the row of hostile faces waiting for her to crumble. "None of it is true." "Mrs. Ravencourt," Ashford began, but she cut him off. "I am not finished." She straightened her spine. "I left my father's house of my own free will because he attempted to force me into marriage with a man I did not choose. I walked into a storm because I preferred death to a lifetime of servitude. And when the Duke of Stormhaven followed me, when he offered me shelter and protection and choice, I accepted. Not because I was confused or manipulated, because I was finally, for the first time in my life, free." "These are pretty words," Roderick interjected, "but the documents clearly show a prior understanding between Miss Holloway and myself. She cannot simply walk away from a binding agreement." "There was no agreement." Marin turned to face him directly. "There were letters forged by my father, documents I never signed, promises I never made. You knew, Mr. Fane. You knew I had not consented, and you pursued the match anyway. Because you needed my dowry. Because your family is bankrupt, your creditors circling, your future collapsing." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. "I have testimony," she continued, "from servants who witnessed your cruelty to your first wife, from creditors who can document your debts, from neighbors who heard her weeping at night, who saw her fade away month by month until there was nothing left." Roderick paled, his composure cracking. "That's a lie. It's the truth. And if this inquiry continues, I will present every piece of evidence I've gathered. I will expose every secret you've hidden. I will make certain that all of London knows exactly what kind of man you are." Silence. Total, ringing silence. Lord Ashford's expression had shifted from smug to uncertain. He glanced at Bartholomew, who had gone very still. "This inquiry was called to question the validity of my marriage," Marin said, her voice steady. "But the only thing that should be questioned is why these men felt entitled to control my choices in the first place. I am not property. I am not currency. I am a woman who chose her own path, her own partner, her own future. And no panel of lords, no forged documents, no angry father will change that." She looked at Kaelin, who was watching her with something like awe. "I chose him," she said simply. "Freely, willingly, with full knowledge of the consequences. And I would choose him again, 1,000 times over. That is my testimony." She sat down. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Lord Ashford cleared his throat. "This inquiry will recess while the panel considers the evidence presented. We will reconvene tomorrow morning with our findings." The chamber erupted in noise, but Marin barely heard it. Kaelin was at her side, his hand finding hers, his eyes bright with emotion. "You were magnificent," he said. "I was terrified." "You didn't show it." He lifted her hand to his lips. "Whatever happens tomorrow, know this. I have never been prouder to be your husband." She leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. The battle was not over. The panel might still rule against them. But she had said her piece, claimed her truth, refused to be silenced. Whatever came next, she would face it standing up. The verdict came at noon the following day. Marin sat beside Kaelin in the same chamber, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. The room was even more crowded than before, word of her testimony having spread through London overnight. She saw familiar faces in the gallery, women she had known as Vivian's friend, some sympathetic, others merely curious. Lord Ashford rose, his expression unreadable. "The panel has reviewed all evidence presented in this matter," he began, his voice echoing through the chamber. "We have examined the marriage license, the testimony of witnesses, the claims of breach of promise, and the various accusations made by both parties." Marin's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear him. "It is the finding of this panel that the marriage between Kaelin Ravencourt, Duke of Stormhaven, and Marin Holloway, now, Marin Ravencourt, was conducted legally and in accordance with all applicable laws." Relief crashed over her like a wave. The license was valid. The vicar was authorized. The witnesses were credible. There is no evidence of coercion, manipulation, or mental incapacity on the part of the bride. Beside her, Kaelin exhaled slowly. Furthermore, regarding the claim of breach of promise filed by Roderick Fane, the panel finds that no binding agreement existed between Mr. Fane and the former Miss Holloway. The documents presented as evidence bear clear signs of forgery and cannot be accepted as legitimate. Roderick shot to his feet. "That's impossible. Those letters are genuine, I swear it." "Sit down, Mr. Fane." Ashford's voice was cold. "Additional investigation will be conducted into the origin of these forged documents. You may be called to testify further." Roderick sat, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "Finally," Ashford continued, "the panel wishes to note its deep concern regarding the conduct of certain parties in this matter. The attempt to invalidate a legal marriage through forged evidence and social pressure is a serious offense. We recommend that the appropriate authorities investigate Mr. Bartholomew Holloway's involvement in the creation of fraudulent documents." Marin looked at her father. Bartholomew's face had gone gray. He sat motionless in the back of the chamber, staring straight ahead as the weight of his defeat settled over him. "This inquiry is concluded," Ashford said. "The marriage stands." The chamber erupted. People crowded around them, some offering congratulations, others simply staring with open curiosity. Vivian threw her arms around Marin, laughing and crying at the same time. Lawyers shook hands. Journalists scribbled notes. Through it all, Maren kept her eyes on Kaylin. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, his face buried in her hair. "It's over," he murmured. "We won." "We won," she repeated, still not quite believing it. They emerged from Parliament into pale autumn sunlight. A crowd had gathered outside, drawn by rumors of the scandalous inquiry and its dramatic conclusion. Maren saw faces she recognized, society matrons who had once dismissed her, young women who had whispered behind her back. Now they watched in silence as the Duke of Stormhaven handed his wife into their carriage, with every sign of devoted attention. "They're staring," Maren said, voice low. "Let them stare." Kaylin settled beside her, taking her hand. "They'll have to get used to seeing us together. Some of them will never accept it. The scandal will follow us for years. Then we'll give them something better to talk about." He smiled, that rare, warm smile that transformed his entire face. "We'll throw parties. We'll host balls. We'll be so visibly, obnoxiously happy that they'll have no choice but to admit they were wrong about us." "That sounds exhausting." "It does." He leaned closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But I suspect we'll manage." The carriage rolled through the streets of London, and Maren watched the city pass by outside the window. So much had changed in such a short time. A month ago, she had been a prisoner in her own life, facing a future she had not chosen. Now she was a duchess, a wife, a woman who had stood before Parliament and claimed her own story. "What are you thinking?" Kaylin asked. "I'm thinking about storms." She turned to look at him. "About how terrifying they are, and how sometimes they're exactly what we need. To clear the air, to show us what we're capable of." She laced her fingers through his. "I never would have known how strong I was if I hadn't been forced to run. Never would have found you if I hadn't walked into that tempest. Then I'm grateful for the storm." He brought her hand to his lips. "Even if it nearly gave me a heart attack watching you disappear into it. You followed me. I would follow you anywhere." His eyes met hers, steady and sure. "Through any storm, into any darkness, for the rest of my life." She kissed him, soft and sweet, a promise and a celebration all at once. The carriage carried them north, toward Stormhaven, toward home. Behind them, London buzzed with gossip and speculation. Ahead lay an uncertain future, full of challenges and opportunities, and endless possibilities. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. 1 year later, Maren stood at the window of her private sitting room, watching snow fall gently over the grounds of Stormhaven. The estate was quiet today, the kind of peaceful quiet that came after weeks of celebration. They had hosted their first Christmas ball the previous evening, filling the great hall with guests who had once shunned them and now clamored for invitations. Society had a short memory, it turned out. Or perhaps it simply could not resist a love story with a happy ending. "Wool gathering again?" Kaylin's voice came from behind her, warm with amusement. She turned, smiling at the sight of him. He leaned against the doorframe, looking impossibly handsome in his morning coat, his dark hair slightly disheveled. "Remembering," she corrected. "This time last year, I was trapped in a groundskeeper's cottage, wearing a ruined gown, terrified of what the morning would bring. And now? Now I'm watching snow fall from the window of my own home, married to a man I love, expecting our first child." His face softened, eyes dropping to the slight swell of her belly beneath her morning dress. They had told no one yet, waiting until they were certain, savoring the secret between them. "Have I mentioned recently how much I love you?" he asked, crossing to her. "Not in the last hour." A grievous oversight. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I love you, Maren Ravencourt. I loved you when you argued about crop rotation. I loved you when you ran into a storm. I loved you when you stood before Parliament and claimed your own future. And now I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone." His hand spread across her belly, protective and tender. "Both of you." She leaned back against him, watching the snow continue to fall. Somewhere in the house, Vivienne was organizing the breakfast preparations, humming off-key as she always did. The servants bustled about their duties. Life continued, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. "My father wrote," she said, voice soft. Kaelin stiffened slightly. What did he want? Reconciliation. Of a sort. She had read the letter 3 times, searching for sincerity beneath the formal language. Apparently, his investigation into the forged documents damaged his reputation more than he anticipated. Several of his allies have distanced themselves. He wants to mend fences. "And what do you want?" She considered the question carefully. The wound her father had inflicted still ached sometimes, in quiet moments, when she remembered the cold emptiness in his eyes. "I want him to understand that I'm not the same woman who ran from his dining room a year ago," she said at last. "That if he wants a relationship with me, it will be on my terms, not his. And if he can't accept that, then he'll miss knowing his grandchild." Her voice was steady. "His choice." Kaelin pressed a kiss to her temple. "You've come a long way from the woman who let him make all her decisions. I've come a long way from a lot of things." She turned in his arms, facing him. "We both have." "True." He cupped her face in his hands, studying her with those gray eyes that had watched her for years before he found the courage to act. "I used to think love was a weakness, something that could only complicate my careful plans. Now I know it's the only thing that makes any of it worthwhile." "Getting sentimental in your old age?" "Apparently." He kissed her, soft and lingering. "You've ruined me for sensible detachment." "Good." They stood together at the window, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the snow transform the world into something clean and new. Outside, the storm that had brought them together had long since passed. But its echoes remained, written into the foundation of everything they had built. "Do you ever regret it?" Kaelin asked, voice low. "Walking into that storm?" "Never." She smiled up at him. "It was the best decision I ever made. Even though it ruined your gown? Even though it ruined my gown." He laughed, the sound rich and warm, and pulled her closer. "Then I suppose I should thank the weather," he said, "for being so spectacularly terrible that night." "You could." She rose on her toes, pressing her lips to his. "Or you could simply keep loving me for the rest of our lives. That seems like the easier option." "It does." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Marin let herself sink into the certainty of it. They had chosen each other in the midst of chaos, fought for each other against impossible odds, and built a life that neither of them had dared to imagine. Some storms destroyed, others cleared the way for something new, and some storms, the right ones, led you exactly where you needed to be.